Welcome to From Betrayal to Breakthrough. I'm Dr. Debi Silber, and today's guest is Dr. Maya Shetreat. Maya Shetreat, MD, is a neurologist, herbalist, urban farmer, and author of The Dirt Cure, Healthy Food, Healthy Gut, Happy Child, which has been translated into 10 languages. She's been featured in the New York Times, The Telegraph, NPR, Sky News, The Dr. Oz Show, and more. Dr. Maya is the founder of the Terrain Institute, where she teaches terrain medicine, earth-based programs for transformational healing. She works and studies with indigenous communities and healers in Ecuador and is a lifelong student of ethnobotany, plant healing, and the sacred. And if you notice that you feel better in nature, there's some real science behind it. Nature can be so incredibly healing, especially if you're a highly sensitive person and or an empath. We're going to be talking all about how to use nature as a tool to help you heal and so much more. Here's Dr. Maya. Okay, so today we have Dr. Maya Shetreat with us, and she's going to be talking about finding the magic after loss and betrayal. And as you know, something like betrayal absolutely shakes us up. The world as we've known it has come crashing down, but there are people like Dr. Maya who can help us rebuild. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, you know, I know you teach the people who come through you, just healing after loss and things like that. What's your process? Could you just walk us through why they would come in to see you and what types of work, things do you do with them?
Well, so very often the people who come to see me are at a crossroads, and they've usually experienced some kind of crisis, which could be a health crisis. And, I'm trained as a neurologist, both pediatric and adult. So I see a lot of women, really, for the most part, who have either they themselves may have experienced a crisis in their health, in their child's health, and oftentimes it could be in their marriage, or it could have disrupted, many, many aspects of their lives could be disrupted by this experience. And really what it is, what I would think of as this initiatory process where, their life has been going, however their life has been going, their normal everyday life. And then some crisis has come along, and it may have been initiated by a health crisis, but it can be any other, that then they awaken to the fact they kind of can never go back to that life again, is what happens. And so, we're sitting together, and basically it's a period of death for them, where you've died to whatever has been before, the person you were before, and what comes after the death is really a transformation and rebirth, where they're born into something new. And very often, what I find is that as we guide through this process, that the person that is reborn is much more true to who they really are, and that before they might have been living in a way that didn't take advantage of their uniqueness and their greatness and their bigness, in a sense, that they were actually, keeping themselves very small. And so that they now that's been exploded.
And I'm so glad you said that, because transformation, and I see it in my work, it cannot happen unless you're willing to die to the life that you've known. That transformation cannot take place. But so often we're just kind of, going through our days or sleepwalking through life. And it takes these traumas that at the time they're so hard, they're so tragic. We never know how we'll move through them, but they give us the greatest opportunity for growth. So can you give us an example of maybe just a client or patient that you had that came in with some sort of health challenge, or their child came in with some sort of health challenge, and then what did you do with them?
Well, so it could be, I also teach and I have students where, for example, I have I've had people who have lost a child or who have, lost their home. For example, someone who recently lost their home in the fires in Los Angeles, or people who have lost their marriage. And what I see very often is that in the moment they are in that period of death, when it feels like chaos, right? Because nothing that is familiar, or nothing that was before, there's nothing familiar. Everything feels like uncharted territory. And I think like part of what's really important in that period of time is to find things that are grounding, very grounding. So the first thing that I do is try to find practices that are grounding. And one of those things is actually literally going outside and being connected to the earth. And it sounds very basic, maybe very obvious or kind of silly, but in fact, it's very powerful because, one thing that is a constant is our deep connection with nature. It's a very ancient connection and it's a very profound connection. And there's a lot of actually documented in science health benefits, including emotional, support really, and transformation that we have simply from being connected to nature.
And you know what? I have to tell you, I live in New York and it gets really cold and sometimes it's just rainy or drab out. And I travel a lot. And every time I go to somewhere, let's say like San Diego or something, I physically feel better. So that's a real thing then. That's not just because I'm on vacation, even if it's a working vacation. Physically, there's something about being at the beach or something that's doing something.
Absolutely. And in fact, even like being in the forest has been really studied, especially in Japan and that area, because there's a practice there called Shinrin-yoku or forest bathing, which has so many benefits from a physical standpoint to an emotional standpoint to a brain function standpoint. I mean, people have better mood, better sleep, better memory, better executive function. I mean, kind of like all the things that you want, better immune function, all simply from just immersing yourself in the beauty of the forest periodically. And so I would actually say, that, how there are those preschools where kids are like sent outside in all weather, and they just have to have their little slicker on, or they have their big, giant winter coat and they look like little Eskimos. We kind of have to do that too. We as adults, especially when we're going through the grieving process, we actually have to put on our little Eskimo coats and be like those toddlers or little kindergartners that are being sent out in all weather and really allow ourselves to be in that. Especially, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but when there's a little bit wild weather, if it's raining or if it's like, a little windy or something, like it's actually very healing when you're feeling kind of grief or wild inside, as a way of really like releasing that and feeling that kind of mirroring, because like there's kind of a concept, right? Like, as without, so within. And this idea that we actually, connect to the environment around us. And it's a true way of healing.
And is there, I have no idea if this is the case, but is there a certain type of weather or aspect of nature that would be more healing than another, or is it just a personal preference?
Well, I don't think it has to be a particular way. Like for some people, and also, so part of what I do with people is we work on ritual. And the reason that I work on ritual, and it's not necessarily a religious thing at all, but more about this idea of really stepping outside of time and stepping outside of the ordinary into kind of a sacred place for your own healing. And so there's a lot of ways to do that. both, indoors and outdoors, using actually and connecting to nature. Like sometimes we'll build a sort of sacred space, like a little sort of altar, a healing altar. And the process of making that, some people will use crystals or just stones or, I don't know, pine cones, sometimes little objects that are very special to them, or pictures, different kinds of things like that, using little bits of nature indoors. And sometimes it can be being outdoors. It could be going and immersing yourself in the ocean, or going to the ocean and maybe doing some kind of release ritual for yourself, at a lake or an ocean. It can be being in the forest. It could be being at the beach, but I do think that it's really that direct connection that is powerful. I sometimes, believe it or not, in my office, and this might sound crazy, but you wouldn't believe how effective it is. People, when they're feeling really agitated and upset, and anxious in my office, I have a very large rock. It's not a crystal. It's just a large rock, heavy. And I put it in their lap. And it transforms them.
Wow.
Immediately. Like, people are truly amazed. And I do it with kids. I do it with adults. And it is unbelievable how grounding and how just, how balancing in a sense it can be. Just that small, thing. They are not outside. They're not doing anything dramatic or creative, just sitting with a big rock in their laps.
That's so interesting. And I'm looking around in my office, and I have this sort of little bowl of rocks that just have the little sayings on them. And I just love grabbing one and feeling it. And very often as I'm speaking to people or as I'm doing a podcast, I'm holding them, I'm rubbing them, and there is something that just feels really good about it. So that's so interesting. Now, talk to us about sensitive. Someone who is sensitive, or a highly sensitive person. Is nature even that much more important for someone like that?
Well, absolutely. And I think in many cases, it's a lot of times the sensitive people that might be more subject to these, or vulnerable to these kinds of periods, like these kinds of events in their lives, because a lot of times they're they might be a little bit more vulnerable, let's say, especially if they haven't learned to really respect their boundaries well. And so part of also what I do with people is really help them kind of understand themselves as sensitive people or as empaths, because we have not really, in our society, we don't have a good language, or even like a good, a sense of appreciation for the gifts that empaths and sensitive people have. But they really do. They're very perceptive, and very, very attuned to the people around them and their environments. And that's part of what makes them a little bit more vulnerable. So, when I work with people who are sensitive, on the one hand, I'm really teaching them about how to protect themselves, which doesn't mean withdrawing from life, very much engaging with life, but also just knowing where those boundaries are, both, physical and emotional boundaries, and also really energetic boundaries. And we definitely also work with healing through the earth. And absolutely, it's true that highly sensitive people and empaths, and these are kind of two categories with a lot of crossover, are known as one of the characteristics to be very connected to often plants or the earth or nature or animals. This is actually a very common thread. And so it's a real source of healing. And I believe many people intuitively can find that for themselves, but also it's untapped for so many people, creating this kind of healing relationship with nature and with the earth.
And I think that's so, it's just not, like you said, I mean, it's just not understood. First of all, I think that's why I have 6 dogs. So you answered that question. Can you, let's unpack that a little bit. Can you talk about the difference maybe between a highly sensitive person and an empath, and maybe the characteristics of both?
Sure. So a highly sensitive person, so there's people who are empathic, which is hopefully most of us, and you might be someone who, like, your heart goes out to another person, in a time of difficulty or a time of joy, right? So that's like what being empathic is. But then there's sort of next level to that might be being a highly sensitive person. And so a highly sensitive person tends to have a lower threshold for stimulation. And more, they might be more sensitive to things like light or sound or smells. They may have like kind of aversions to like large groups, need for alone time, and sometimes also additional time to transition from a high stimulation part of their day to a low stimulation. So like when they get home, let's say from work, where they might have had to be doing a lot of different things, talking to a lot of people, around a lot of noise and action, they need more transition time to get into that low stimulation place and that peaceful, centered place. And then highly sensitive people tend to have a love of nature and quiet environments.
So they could be in the loud environment, but they're just not comfortable, and they really look to leave that and then get that quiet. So it's so interesting you're saying this, because if I tell you how often I travel, I'll go to a conference and it's great during the day and I love it. And then I really want to just go back to my room. And then there are the people who they just want to party all night long. And
go, right?
Yeah. And I just don't have it in me. It's like I've used up whatever wattage I could, and I feel so completely drained and need to replenish. So is that that's like one of those characteristics then, I guess?
Exactly. It's sort of, and for some people, I mean, it's really like a highly sensitive person, which, by the way, does not mean you have to be an introvert. It's not necessarily that, probably we think about like 20% of people, or maybe even 30 of highly sensitive people are actually extroverts. So it doesn't mean that, you have to be super shy or an introvert, but it, these are also people who might like going to a parade, or like going to be at Times Square on New Year's Eve, or, going to some really crowded concert is like kind of a nightmare, right?
Okay.
Like they're like, no, thank you. And yeah, absolutely. I do think that what you're describing is sort of that need. Like you can be in the activity, you can enjoy, kind of a stimulating environment, but you have limits. And there are those people who, who you're describing, who can do the social thing and kind of the high stimulation kind of experience, let's say at a conference or wherever, nonstop, for days and days and days. So I definitely agree with you on that. And so then in contrast or kind of almost the next level to that would be an empath.
And you know what, Dr. Maya, before you go into that, I just want to, for anybody listening, what would somebody do? So let's say they are a highly sensitive person. They're at this conference. It's a 3-day conference. They do what they need to do during the day. They really want to replenish. Is there something where let's say they're they're at the hotel in the conference room and they really can't go anywhere? Is there something that would help them during that time?
Well, absolutely. And I think it's something that would help for both the sensitive people and the empaths, because there's a lot of overlap. But, one of the things I'd say just specifically for that is if you're in your room, let's say you're not going to go find a spot in nature, which often people can do, but sometimes you can't, is actually what I recommend is creating a little altar in your own space, in your hotel room. And I actually do that whenever I travel, because I also travel quite a bit and it can be very stimulating, especially, and just overwhelming, especially, like I recently went to Australia and, was giving several talks and it was like going to the other side of the equator for me, and very, it could be a very dramatic experience and obviously a lot of stimulation. So, some of the things that you can just do, I mean, obviously, it's important to like eat well, and drink. I mean, these are basic things, but really for people who are more sensitive, they experience, disruption or eating like junky foods or foods that really bother them much more acutely than maybe other people might. So it's really important that they're eating well for their bodies, which could involve bringing food with them or, planning a little bit more in advance, and drinking plenty and sleep. I mean, those are like really the basics. But what I recommend if someone's had that kind of day where they've gotten a lot of stimulation is as soon as you get to your room, you shower. And there's a lot to be said, believe it or not, from a spiritual standpoint, energetic standpoint, an emotional standpoint, and a physical standpoint of just washing. It is a cleansing experience. And in the work, I've studied for many years with like elders and, indigenous people. And that's been a big part of my training. And cleaning yourself with water is critical, a critical part of caring for your physical, emotional, and spiritual bodies.
Oh, that's a great idea. And is this also why I know some people who, as they, when they travel, they bring sage with them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a little tricky to do that in the hotel room, but, I definitely, it doesn't have to be sage. I mean, you can do it with rosemary, you can do it with mugwort, you can do it with Palo Santo. There are all different kinds of plants that actually you can burn, or they kind of smolder really a little bit. And that smoke is also used as a way of helping to clear yourself. Really, and clear the environment around you. And interestingly, there's actually science behind this idea of medicinal smoke, that it actually even helps change the environment from a microbial standpoint. That's been actually measured and studied. So it's very cool because, it's a very ancient practice, but it's something that, we're seeing, as with many things that are ancient practices, that there's science growing.
It's so interesting. But I would say for everybody listening, as far as travel, you may not want to set off the fire alarms with the sage and take that risk. So it sounds like water and just showering is a great idea.
Yeah, but stepping outside, you can do that, so it isn't something that's beyond, and it is nice to have a few backup tools in case, if you're feeling really disrupted. And this could be also, I think really relevant for going home for the holidays, or having people come to your home for the holidays. It's really important to clear yourself and clear your space, which means doing the showers. It means grounding, getting outdoors if you can, or having some special rock. Like you said, you might grab a couple of those rocks from your desk and take them with you when you fly and when you travel, so that you kind of have those things that are able to help you ground a little bit, even when you're not home.
And is there a certain rock or crystal or something that you know of that is really helpful in grounding?
Well, there are many, actually. But the thing about crystals is they can be also very activating for some people, depending. So if you're a person who has kind of like, I think the most important thing, is to feel really drawn to whatever crystal you're using. Like, I think it's great. Like, you kind of can't go wrong with clear quartz. For example, if you're looking for something, there's lots of wonderful stones. Tourmaline, black tourmaline is another one that's very grounding and very good kind of for deflecting, anything that you don't want to. But I personally have to tell you, I think that even having just a regular stone that you could even find outside, something that catches your eye or draws you, that can be as helpful and as grounding as any, beautiful crystal can be.
Okay, that's beautiful. Now, what about the empath? Let's talk about the empath.
So empaths have basically all of the same qualities as the highly sensitive person, but they tend to have more of a super sensitivity, sensing kind of subtle energy, feeling other people's physical symptoms or emotions or energy in their own bodies. And I'll talk about that in a second. They're super sensitive to unspoken language, and tend to have this heightened state of subtle awareness. So the empaths, and there's a lot of different types of empaths where, these are people who might really have these gifts in a sense of being very intuitive, or dreaming things sometimes even before they happen, or being very, very connected to plants or animals. There's plant empaths and animal empaths. So this is sort of a particular group of people that tend to be much more intuitive. And so they can run into certain kinds of challenges because they get very overstimulated and really feel things intensely. And it tends to be actually that people sense that they are empaths and will sort of, take advantage of that in some way by really like talking to them about their most personal, traumas and things like that. And so they can end up feeling kind of emotional burnout. And a lot of empaths end up, because they're not really aware of this aspect of themselves, that they need to care for these gifts that they have, can end up with things like, feeling isolated or lonely, or even having addictions as a way of kind of coping. So it's a really important thing to know about yourself, because there are a lot of gifts associated with it, and it just takes special care to kind of navigate these challenges that can come up.
So let's say somebody's listening now and all of a sudden the light bulb just went off. They said, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I felt things as deeply because I'm an empath. I had no idea that, here I am sensing things before they happen, and everybody's coming to me with all their stuff, and I'm feeling it like 10 times more than everybody else around me. What do they do? How do they protect themselves?
Well, so the first thing, there are three kind of basic things about just creating space that I would say first and foremost. So physical space, creating physical space, step away. Sometimes you need to step away. And I really just give people permission to, excuse themselves. You're at a party, you're on a train, make sure you have headphones. I always recommend having headphones as a way of being able to, you're in the cafe trying to get work done, whatever it might be, being able to really step away, excuse yourself to the bathroom, or say, excuse me, it was so good to talk to you. You can always use your phone as an out, but really sometimes just creating physical space is very important. Creating emotional space for yourself, which means saying no. That is something that a lot of people, especially women and especially, empaths, have a hard time with. We're kind of trained and conditioned to be givers. And it doesn't mean that we're not givers if we say no, or that we're stopping that, but it's being selective, because ultimately, whenever you say yes to something, you're saying no to other things. So if you're saying yes to something that is not sustainable for you, or does not take good care of yourself, and your own needs and sensitivities, and perhaps empathy, then, what you're doing is saying no to those things when you say yes to someone else's needs that might not be in alignment. So just being able to say no is another way of setting boundaries. And it's crazy how, in a way, it's sort of unbelievable how much we really need permission to say no. But it's very effective. And then creating energetic space, which for me is breathing and really focusing on breath. So a lot of times when we're in a situation where we feel like someone is kind of overstepping, or not, respecting our boundaries, we hold our breath. And that is actually, so breathing is a way of creating space inside of you and around you. So just focusing on taking, slow, deep breaths is another basic way. And these might all sound very obvious, but you'd be surprised at how many people are not employing these very simple strategies, which can make a huge difference.
Oh, absolutely. They all make so much sense. So what do you want to make sure we get in before we wrap up?
Well, I think what's really important is just to know that in these periods, whether, if you're a sensitive person, you're an empath, or you're just someone who's gone through this kind of initiatory process where, your whole world has been turned upside down, and you're kind of looking for the roadmap, where you can't find the roadmap, but you're looking to kind of navigate this new uncharted territory. It's really important and actually incredibly healing, and also a way to find guidance, your own inner guidance and purpose to connect with nature and to connect with the natural world, because there is a real space for both absorbing grief and transforming and kind of alchemizing trauma. And really, like, the earth is a beautiful place to experience some of that rebirth that happens, and that transformation. There's a lot of guidance if you go and especially find a space that feels really special to you. So I have people who are going and finding a particular space that they love in their garden or outdoors, or in the woods near them or a park, and going back to that place regularly can feel like a very special and healing part of the process.
Some great healing advice. And where do we learn more about you? Where do we go?
So best way is you can follow me on Instagram, Dr. Maya Shetreat. I post there really regularly a lot of stuff about this. And also at my website, drmaya.com, DRMAYA.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Everybody get out in nature. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I love the idea of making physical space, emotional space, and energetic space as a way to help ground ourselves and stay calm. Dr. Maya gave so many practical and useful suggestions that can help the empath, highly sensitive person, or anyone who wants to reduce their stress and help move through their trauma. Stay in touch with Dr. Maya by going to drmaya.com, and we'll have all of her information at pbtinstitute.com/podcast. Here's my biggest takeaway. There are so many gifts that come with being a highly sensitive person or an empath, although you may also experience some of the downsides, which can be exhausting yourself because you're taking on the energy of others and so much more. Learn to embrace this beautiful side of you by understanding what you need to replenish your energy, and be sure to give that to yourself. It's not selfish, it's self-preservation. And let's start with giving you something by allowing me to give you a gift. Head over to pbtinstitute.com and receive my gift of How Your Biggest Crisis Reveals Your Greatest Gift. And let us support you. Go to Facebook and join our group, Women Hacking Betrayal, where we give information, tools, and support to help you move forward and heal once and for all. Can't wait to be with you next time, and here's to your breakthrough.